Okay, hello everybody. We may as well make a start to this. Hello to everybody who's coming in through Zoom and also anybody who's watching over YouTube. You're very welcome to the training session today. My name is Dara Coakley and I'm joined by my colleagues Shane Cronin and Roshin Garvey. We all work in the Department of Technology Enhanced Learning, or TEL, in CIT. And what we're going to do today, obviously, is we're going to talk a bit about remote learning for the coming semester. So, we're aware that it's a strange time and that it's hard for everybody to adjust to kind of these new ways of doing things. So, we're here today to talk about kind of how this will work, maybe from a technical point of view. I suppose we have tried in as much as possible to make the whole process as easy as possible for everybody, even if it doesn't always seem like it. So, in terms of remote learning for the coming semester, I suppose what might be useful is to maybe think about this in terms of maybe three different elements. So, the first element would be live online classes. Now, we're recommending that those take place through Zoom, but it's up to your individual the lecturer to decide what the most appropriate tool is. But for the most part, we are recommending Zoom as the way for live online classes to take place. The other big tool, which we would be suggesting, would be the use of Canvas for accessing files, uploading assignments, things like that. And then there may be some additional tools that your lecturer may, depending on your lecture, depending on the subject matter, may wish to kind of use with you. And in addition to that, something to think about as well might be the Canvas Student app, which is very useful for updates, notifications, so on and so forth. So those really would be the three main tools that we're recommending for use for the coming semester for remote learning. And I suppose the big thing about this is that all of these different items are really kind of embedded in Canvas. So most things, especially access to Zoom classes, will be through the Canvas VLE. And unless you're told otherwise, certainly for live online lectures, most people will be using Zoom, which you can access through Canvas. So, just in terms of Canvas, very briefly, I'm sure most of you are familiar with it, but for maybe those who aren't, it's basically CIT's virtual learning environment. All staff and students have access to it and should be enrolled on the relevant modules. And the suggestion with Canvas is that it's used for sharing resources, receiving assignment files, so on and so forth. But we have, over the last couple of years, integrated different systems into it for live online lecturing through Zoom, anti plagiarism, automated assessments, all these different things. So, in terms of, I suppose, accessing your live Zoom classrooms, the suggestion really is that you go through Canvas in order to access these. And this is by design for authentication purpose, security purpose, so on and so forth. All Zoom classes are meant to be accessed through Canvas. So instead of opening the app and trying to get into kind of your Zoom classroom that way, the recommendation is that you go through the Canvas VLE in order to get into your Zoom classroom. So within this session, excuse me, what I'm hoping to cover, and I'm hoping to keep it to no more than 30 to 40 minutes, is the process of logging into Canvas, accessing your modules, the whole module interface. I'm going to talk a bit about signing into Zoom, joining a Zoom classroom, and everything that might be involved there, which would be setting up audio, mic control, chat, and screen sharing. I'm going to talk about accessing a recording, and I'm going to end this session by talking a bit about the help and support features which are available to you. Now, if you do have any questions, I suppose we will be taking kind of questions at the end of the session. If anything does come up during the session, I'd ask that you use the Q&A feature in Zoom if you're joining us through Zoom, and Shane and Roisin will be able to help you through that. And if you're watching this through YouTube, there is a live chat option. So if you have any questions, maybe put them down there. Now, obviously, there's a lot of people watching and attending, so apologies in advance if we can't get to all of your questions, but we really will try our best to try and get to as many of them as we possibly can. So, what I'd like to do is I'd like to basically jump into a live demonstration of all of the different elements that I was talking about there. In terms of accessing Canvas, there's a few different ways of doing it. The URL for getting into Canvas is cit.instructure.com. If that's hard to remember, if you go to tel.cit.ie, which is the Department of TEL website, there's a link up at the top of the screen to log into Canvas, and there's a link from the homepage as well. Apart from that, if you go to www.mycit.ie, there's also a link to Canvas inside there. So if you're stuck trying to get into it at any stage, those might be slightly easier to remember. And when you go to cit.instructure.com, you'll automatically be redirected to CIT's single sign-on. And the way that you can log into Canvas is by using your student number and the password. Basically, whatever you use to get into your MyCIT email is what will bring you into Canvas. So just to very briefly go over, I suppose, the system in Canvas for those who might not be familiar with it. When you first log into Canvas, you land in on your dashboard here. And what this will show you is the modules that you're enrolled in and the modules that might be coming up for you over the next semester or two. Now, it might happen that you'd be enrolled in a module, but it's not showing up on the dashboard for you here. More often than not, the reason for that is that modules in Canvas have to be published. So there's a step where lecturers have to publish each module when they're happy for students to get access to it. If it happens that your module isn't showing up here, there's no reason to panic. It might just be the case that your lecturer has not published that yet. If I go over to the left-hand menu here, which is the main Canvas navigation menu, and if I click into the modules here and click into all modules, this will basically give me a list of all of the modules that I'm enrolled in and all of the future enrollments which will be coming up for me. If I look in here, what I can see is that for the active term or the active semester that we're in, these are the modules which are here. And I can see that I have some additional modules here, but that these haven't been published yet. So if you're not sure whether you've been enrolled in a module or whether a lecturer just hasn't published that module yet, if you go into modules, all modules, you'll be brought onto this screen. And from here, you can see, okay, I'm enrolled in this module, it just hasn't been published yet. If you're meant to be enrolled in a module and it's not showing up for you, the recommendation is to contact Web for Student and to apply to be enrolled in the specific module there. And if you have difficulties with that, we recommend talking to your lecturer. One other item that we might just cover just before we jump into an actual module inside in Canvas is if I go up here to Account and I go into Notifications. Canvas by default tends to send you a lot of notifications. What you can do if you go into your account area here and into notifications is you can decide what Canvas should send you a notification about and how often it should do that. Notifications generally would come in to your email address. So every time there's a notification that has to happen, you'll get an email from Canvas. What you can do here is you can look at all of the different module activities and you can decide whether you want to get a notification on that, for example, straight away, whether you want a daily summary, or whether you want a weekly summary, or whether you don't want to hear anything about it. So depending on the amount of notifications you want to get and what you want to be notified about, it might be worth just kind of adjusting this as time goes on. For example, you probably don't want to get a notification every single time a file is added, but you do want to get a notification anytime a lecturer puts up an announcement. In addition to this, there is a app for Canvas. It's called the Canvas Student app. If you do want to download that app for Android or for iOS, if I go in here, I should be able to get at the mobile login. So I'm just going to skip that bit because obviously something went up there. But generally, if you have downloaded the app and you go to this QR for mobile login, basically it'll give you a QR code. You can just scan the QR code using the app, and that will give you the ability to. It will basically automatically log you in according to your student account on the Canvas Student app. When you're ready to enter into a module, you simply click into the module and it will bring you into this, where you'll see this kind of module interface. Now, the module interface might vary depending on how your lecturer has set up the module. So, for example, a new element which we've introduced this semester is this thing called a syllabus. And what a syllabus is basically it just gives you a bit of an overview of the module, and you'll get a summary of all the upcoming module events, things like assignments, things like Zoom calls, so on and so forth, down the page here. Up at the top of the syllabus area as well, you'll also see any recent announcements. So any announcements that your lecturer has put up, these would typically be things that they want you to be aware of, like maybe upcoming deadlines or cancelled classes or anything like that. Those would very often come through announcements. Depending on how your lecture set up the module, though, this kind of homepage you land in on might be different. It might be a list of the units in the module. It might be kind of an activity stream for you. So if you don't see this screen, it's nothing to worry about. Each lecturer has the ability to set up their module slightly differently. So it's maybe just something to be aware of there. Now, very briefly, I'd just like to talk a little bit about how you might use a module inside in Canvas. One very important area is this Units tab over here, and I can navigate through the different sections of this particular module using this menu on the left-hand side. If I click into the Units tab, what the Units tab is basically, this might involve all of the files that a lecturer wants me to have access to. They'd be displayed inside here. Now, again, each lecture will probably do things a little bit differently, but for the most part, all of the files will be contained like this under particular units. So the one unit here, for example, is week 1, module introduction, so on and so forth. And the different files that have been made available will be listed under each of the individual units. So you can click into those files in order to get at anything that your lecture puts up for you. Another big feature inside in Canvas is the ability for you as a student to submit against assignments. So a lecturer might create an assignment that they want you to upload against. The way that you can get at these is if you click into the assignments button or into the assignments item over in the left-hand menu and click into the assignment in question. From inside here, you'll usually have some kind of an introduction or some kind of a brief from your lecturer. And what you can do as well when you're ready to submit against a particular assignment is click on the red Submit Assignment button up here in the top right corner. And at the bottom of the page, then you'll have the ability to upload a file. So you can choose a file, and depending on how many files you want to upload, you can click here if you need to upload more than one file. When you're finished with all of that, you can press Submit Assignment. And if you want to, you can put in a comment to draw your lecturer's attention to something here. So that's essentially just the process of being able to get at files that your lecturer puts up and being able to submit against particular assignments that your lecturer might create in Zoom. Now, moving on to Zoom, the way that you will be able to access the different live Zoom classes for this coming semester is by going into the module in question and clicking into the Zoom tab item in the left-hand menu here. Now, just very briefly before I get into this, maybe something to be aware of in case it is of use to you is if your lecture is using the syllabus feature, all of the upcoming Zoom classes that you essentially have access to will be listed kind of further down the syllabus page here. Or else, if I click into this calendar item over in the left-hand menu here, all of the upcoming Zoom classes that I should be able to access will be available inside here as well. And you can turn on or off the different modules that you want kind of appearing in this area over here in the right-hand side under calendars. So if you are trying to get maybe just an overview of all of the Zoom classes that have been created for you across your different modules, the calendar is a useful way to get at these. And if you click on any of those, you should be able to click here to join the meeting pretty much straight away. But I'm just going to jump back into the module in question, and we're going to look at how to join this class through Zoom. Maybe one thing to mention just before I get into this as well is that on occasion it might happen that you might have to sign into Zoom through the client. If this does come up, the recommendation is that if you're presented with the sign in screen within the Zoom client, you click the option to sign in with SSO. If you're asked to provide a URL or a domain, it's telcit.zoom.us, and that will bring you to the standard CIT kind of SSO or sign-in page like the one that we saw just before we logged into Canvas. Now, by design, the recommendation for all of your Zoom classes is that you get at these basically through Canvas. This is for authentication and for security purposes. So if you want to get at a Zoom classroom, the recommendation is not to open up the Zoom client or the Zoom app. It's to go in through Canvas, and you should be automatically logged in to the Zoom classroom if you're going in through the Canvas VLE. If you are having any difficulties in accessing a particular room, a particular Zoom classroom through Canvas, the recommendation is that what you would do is you would basically log out of all of your Zoom devices, and that might be on your phone, on your desktop. It's also recommended that if you go to zoom.us, that you make sure that you're logged out of that area as well. And when you've done all of that, the recommendation is that you visit telcit.zoom.us, and inside here you have the ability to click sign in, and you can sign in there using your MyCIT email and your MyCIT password. So if you are having any difficulties in getting into the Zoom classroom, any authentication issues, the recommendation is sign out of everything, go to telcit.zoom.us, and you should be able to sign in there using your MyCIT details. It's never any harm as well if you go to telcit.zoom.us/download to make sure that you download the Zoom client for meetings, just to make sure you have the most up-to-date version on your own machine. Now, what I'm going to cover next is the process of logging in to or accessing a Zoom classroom. Obviously, I can't show you Zoom while I'm actually using Zoom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a pre-recorded video that I've made for this session. I just ask you to bear with me 2 minutes while I pull that up. Classroom, the way that you do so is by logging into Canvas, accessing the module in question, and going into the Zoom tab on the left hand side here. Within this area then you'll be shown a list of Zoom classrooms for this particular module, current ones as well as future ones. So all you have to do is click on the one which is happening at the moment or about to happen, and just click on the join button to the right hand side of that. What this will do is it will usually prompt you to either download Zoom if you haven't downloaded Zoom already, or else to launch Zoom with a pop-up something like this. So you can simply click on the option to open up that link using the Zoom client. So the first screen that you might see when you try to enter into the Zoom classroom is something like this, which is kind of a waiting room screen. So this is just an initial step before the lecture allows you into the classroom in question. If you want to, you can use the opportunity while you're waiting to test out your speaker and microphone using the button here. And if you click that, it'll just prompt you to identify the speaker that you're using and also the microphone that you're using. So when you're allowed into the Zoom room, you'll see the standard Zoom interface, which will look something like this. Now, depending on the settings that your lecturer has put on their own rooms, this might be slightly different. Some features might be off, some other features might be turned on. But generally, the approach remains the same. There's a menu along the base of the Zoom interface that you can use to interact with the class, with your lecture, so on and so forth. Probably the first thing that you will want to do is to set up your audio. Now, in the bottom left corner, there is the mute and unmute button, which you can use to control whether your mic is on or off. If you click on the little arrow to the right of that icon, what you can do is you can select the microphone and the speaker that you want to use. And one useful feature is this ability to test your speaker and your microphone. If you click into that, Zoom will play a ringtone for you. If you can hear it, you press yes. If you don't, you press no. And the same with this microphone, and you can see the input level coming in from the microphone there. When you're finished with all of that, you just press the finish button and your audio should be set up. So that's usually worth doing just as an initial step in the Zoom room, just to make sure that if you have to turn on your mic, that it's working okay. If your lecturer asks you to turn on your webcam, which they might do, you can turn that on by clicking on the webcam icon down here. In terms of communicating to your lecturer or to the rest of the students in a Zoom classroom, the microphone is one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is by clicking on this chat button at the base of the screen here. And when you click on this chat button, you'll see that this chat area opens up to the right hand side, and down at the bottom of that you can type in messages. and that will be displayed to everyone inside in the classroom. So depending on what your lecturer asks of you, you may have to turn on your microphone. Otherwise, the chat area is usually a good area to ask questions or request something from your lecturer or from other students. An additional option which might arise is that your lecturer might ask you to share your screen. So they might ask you to do this in order to show some work that you've done, in order for you to present or to perform to the rest of the group. So if that feature is enabled, if they do want you to share your screen, you can do so by clicking on this share screen button at the base of Zoom. And when I click on that, what will happen is that I'll be presented with this pop-up. By default, my desktop will be selected, and what that means basically is that I will share my desktop, so anything that I can see on my screen, other people will see on their screen. So with that in mind, it might be wise, depending on what you're trying to show other people, to select either the application itself, for example, a browser window or a Word document or maybe a PowerPoint. So you just select just the item that you want other people to see. Another important element is that if you're going to be playing video or audio clips, let's say for example a YouTube video, ideally you want to tick this box down here to share computer sound, and all that means is that other people will hear, for example, the same thing that you hear on your own computer, such as the YouTube video, the piece of music, so on and so forth. But important obviously if you're ticking this to make sure that, for example, you're not already playing something on your machine like music. When you're happy with all of that, you can click on the share button, and you'll see here that this now is being shared. The Zoom interface will shrink down to the base of the screen. If you want to, you can move this this kind of dock item to the top of the screen by clicking on this little arrow down here. You can pause the share by clicking on this button if you so want to, and when you're finished with all of that, you simply press stop share, and that will return Zoom to its normal interface. When you're ready to leave the Zoom classroom, you can do that by clicking on this leave button down here, or else when your lecturer decides to end the class, you'll be presented with a message like this. Your lecturers may decide to record their live classrooms or not. It's a decision which is left up to the lecturer. If they do decide to record these live sessions, you can access the recordings under Cloud Recordings by clicking into the Zoom item in the module in question and clicking on the Cloud Recording tabs up to the right here. From here, you'll be presented with the different kind of classroom recordings which have taken place and the date on which they took place. What you can do from here is you can simply click on a recording in question and you'll be presented with something like this. If you click on the play button for the recording in question, that will bring you to this area and you'll be able to view the recording as well as an audio transcript over here on the right hand side. Now it might happen that you would wish to access a recording, and depending on where and how you're logged in, you might be asked to sign in to access the recording in question. If you are having any difficulties in accessing the recording, what you can do is you can go to telcit.zoom.us and click on the option here to sign in. When you're prompted, you should put in your student number and your password, and that will log you in to the CIT Zoom instance, and from within here you should be able to access the recording just by going back into Canvas and clicking into the recording in question. Okay, so hopefully that gives something of at least a bit of an overview of the main kind of features on using Zoom. So I suppose the main kind of takeaway message maybe from today is really just in terms of how to get into the Zoom classroom. It's recommended that you get at this Zoom classroom through Canvas, which will take care of any authentication issues. And if you do have any authentication issues, you can kind of overcome those by logging out of Zoom and going to canvas.zoom.us and logging in there. And as Shane pointed out in, I think, the chat area, all of those sign-in steps are highlighted in some of the help articles that we've provided. Now, in terms of some supports around kind of Zoom and Canvas, one very, very big one is that there is 24/7 support for Canvas within the Canvas system. And this is provided by Instructure, who are the people who provide the kind of software. So if you do have any difficulties at all in using Canvas at any stage, if you're having a difficulty in doing something, if you're not sure how to kind of do something, the way that you can kind of get support at any stage is within the Canvas system. If you just click on this help icon in the main left hand menu, this will give you a couple of options in terms of how you can talk to a support person. There is telephone support, you can submit a ticket, you also have the ability to email support@instructure.com. What we would really recommend is this web chat. And if you select this, it allows you to basically kind of talk to a Canvas support agent live online. It'll maybe just ask you for some initial details, your name, your last name, your email, and what it's about. And if you kind of go through that process, that's a very, very useful way of getting a hand if you're not sure about how to do anything at all inside the Canvas environment. And again, that is a 24/7 support service. So that is meant to be always available to CIT students. So any difficulties at all in using Canvas, we'd really strongly recommend you make that the first port of call. Apart from that, on our own website, we have a number of resources for students to do with kind of remote learning. Now, we're hoping to keep adding to these all the time, but if you go to tel.cit.ie/remote-learning, you'll be able to access all of those. We'll have videos, we'll have kind of various downloads available, and we also have a number of kind of tips and kind of suggestions for how to manage the coming semester in terms of remote learning. But again, we'll be adding to that all of the time, so we'd recommend you to kind of look at that every now and again to try and get access to as many supports as you can. If you do go to tel.cit.ie as well, at the top of the screen, there is a link to what's called the student help articles. And basically, we have a kind of a knowledge base or this kind of help area for students where we provide a number of articles on a whole range of different things, Canvas, Zoom, and other software. You can get at that by going to edtechstudents.eu.helpdocs.com, but it's probably easier to just go to tel.cit.ie and click on the student help article link up at the top of the screen. And we'll have a number of articles in there related to accessing Canvas, accessing Zoom. And again, that's something we're trying to add to all the time. So we'll keep on adding to that. If you do have any difficulties, if you're not sure about it to do something, we really do recommend that as well as a useful place to check in. And if you look at the chat area in this Zoom session, Shane has also put up a link to one of the most useful help articles, which is to do with getting started in Zoom for CIT students. So that is it in terms of the session today, and I think we were able to keep it to under the half-hour mark, which is always good. If you do have any questions now, we would ask that maybe if you want to put those into the chat or into the QA area for anyone who's attending the kind of Zoom session, and anybody who is watching this over YouTube, if you want to make use of the live chat feature, we'll try and help as much as we can there. Obviously, there's a lot of people coming, so if there's a lot of questions, forgive us if we don't get around to your question. But if you do want to ask any questions, now is probably a good time to do so, and we'll try to answer them as best we possibly can.